The lie I'm going to talk about in this video is very subtle to grasp. It took me a long time to grasp it, and I've seen over the years how people have struggled with it. So I'm going to try and introduce it in a gentle way and gradually build up. So the first thing we can say here is that most of us were brought up with the idea that all human beings are pretty much the same. They come from the same source, they have the same basic characteristics, just like our physical bodies, even though there are differences, but they are still based on the same basic design. We think that our psychology is also based on the same design. And that, of course, is not really supported by observations of history and how people have behaved. Because if we do look at history, we see, as I mentioned in one of my previous talks, that in every society we see there's been a tendency for an elite to form. And this elite, if you look at what they are actually believing and what they are putting out there, it's sort of schizophrenic what they're saying. Because on the one hand, the elite wants to be seen as being special. I mean, that's their claim to power, their claim to legitimacy. They should be allowed to rule over the people because they have special abilities to rule. And they have special abilities to run the business world or to be religious authorities. So they want to set themselves up as having a powerful position, as having a privileged position where they can't really be questioned, they can't really be challenged. And they claim that the reason why they should be allowed to have these positions, the reason why the majority of the people should submit to them, is that they have special abilities, they are special. And you can see historically how many societies have had a religious justification for this, where they have said that some people are special. Like in India, going thousands of years back, you have the caste system that divides humanity into 4 different castes. And in most religious societies, you had a priest class that was seen as special. Many times you also had a ruling class. So, for example, the Catholic Church for over 1,000 years ruled Europe because it was claimed that the Pope and the priests were in a special class, had certain special abilities, and the Church has authorized the secular rulers, the kings and the noblemen, so they were also special compared to the people. But at the same time, if we look at history, we see that the worst atrocities that we have seen, the worst killings, the worst abuse of life that we've seen throughout history, have been committed by this power elite, members of the power elite. It's not the ordinary peasant who goes out and commits mass murder. It's not an ordinary person, normal person, who comes up with the idea to build concentration camps and gas chambers. But when it comes to evil, the ruling class, the power elite, they are claiming that in that respect they are not special. They are not worse than anybody else. They are just human beings. And, you know, traditionally philosophers going way back have talked about the problem of evil. Because we observe that there's what we would call evil on the planet. I mean, I grew up in Denmark in the 1960s, and it was still so close to the Second World War that the concentration camps and the gas chambers was something I learned about in school, and I heard the adults talk about, and I read about it in books. So for me, that was my introduction to evil. And it did definitely raise a question in me as a child that followed me into adulthood. how can evil exist? I mean, how is it possible that some human beings can do this to other human beings? And as I'm saying, the power elite will claim, oh, but it's just human beings who are doing this to human beings. And what is the implication of that? Well, it is. Evil is a part of human nature. It lies latent in human psychology that people can do evil. Mother Teresa is famous for saying that we all have a little Hitler inside of us. And therefore she seemed to believe that all people had the potential to become like Hitler. And this, of course, is implied in the dominant religion of Western societies, namely scientific materialism, which claims that there is nothing outside the material universe, therefore there is, as I said in a previous video, no continuity to our souls or our beings. So we are just born in this lifetime, and we have a certain genetic inheritance we bring with us, but otherwise our childhood is what shapes our psychology and turns us into the adults we are. And therefore, when these people look at Hitler, Stalin, Mao, they must say, well, there may have been a certain inheritance, genetic inheritance, but otherwise it must have been their childhood that made them so evil. Meaning that if any other person was exposed to the same conditions, that person could also become evil. Because that's the only way they can explain evil in a materialistic society. Now, in a religious setting, for example, Christianity, evil is explained by there exists a counterpart to God, an opposition to God called the devil. And it's the devil that makes people evil because they open themselves up to influence from the devil. So it is again implied that all people could open themselves up to this influence of evil, and therefore all people could become evil. And so this is the first lie we're going to look at here. It's not really the main lie I want to talk about in this video, but it's the first lie we need to tackle. Is evil inherent in human nature? Is the propensity to become evil, does it lie latent in the psychology of every human being on the planet? You see, this is what the power elite implies. They implies they should have power because they are special, but they should not be held accountable for any atrocities they commit because that's just human nature. I mean, anybody could do it. Anybody could become so evil. And this is a complete lie. And let's just take I know I've used these historical examples before, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, because I want to put it at a distance. But let's just take a fresh example right here, right now in December 2024, as I'm recording this video. It's barely a week ago that the long-term dictator of Syria, Assad, had to leave the country, had to flee the country, and he is now seeking refuge with another dictator in Moscow. And what has been exposed, which of course that was somewhat known before, but one of the things that was exposed was that in Syria they had built this huge prison. And tens of thousands of people disappeared there. They were taken there. They lived under appalling conditions. Many of the cells didn't have windows, so they lived in total darkness. They weren't allowed to talk. The only thing they could hear was the screams of other prisoners being tortured, because most prisoners were tortured. Many were executed. Many have disappeared, and we still don't know where they are. So at the same time, the dictator lived in this elaborate palace with a huge collection of classic cars and expensive sports cars, while many Syrians could barely feed their children, if they were lucky enough that they hadn't been put to prison. So we look at a person like this, and what makes a person do this? Can you really say that this is in human nature? Because if you look at Syria, can you really say that every person who lives in Syria has the potential to become a dictator that executes anybody who objects to his rule and tortures them? I don't believe you can. It's the same thing with the concentration camps. I know that a big deal has been made out of, you had these prison guards that were shoving the people into the gas chambers and pouring down the poison, and it's considered evil. And you can see that, yeah, these prison guards were probably not as evil as Hitler himself, but they were clearly evil. But I would still raise the question, would all human beings have been willing to do this? And I think the answer is clearly no. Not all human beings would have become prison guards in Auschwitz, but even beyond that, could any human being, if he or she was put in that position, could any human being conceptualize, come up with the idea for the concentration camps or this prison in Syria? Would any human being really be able to do this, to orchestrate this? And that's why I'm saying it's just not realistic. It's a huge lie. And the lie is deliberately put out there by this power elite that I'm talking about, because they want to hide their own existence, or rather their origin, their nature. They want to hide that they're different from other people. In other words, they want to stand out as being different from other people when it gets to gaining power. But when it gets to being held accountable for their abuse of power, they want to hide and say, oh, we're just human beings. It's just, we're no worse than anybody else. Anybody could become like this. And that's cognitive dissonance. And so when we look at this long history of this planet and all of the man's inhumanity to man that we have seen, all the murder and mayhem, the conclusion you have to come to, as far as I'm concerned, is that there are some beings who are in a human body, and their human bodies pretty much look like human bodies. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 ears, 2 eyes, 1 nose. And in some respects, they can appear to be normal human beings. They talk like people. They seem to have normal viewpoints and opinions about certain things. But still, they have this complete insensitivity to life. They have no empathy, as is often called these days. And what we have seen over the last maybe 10 years especially is that there's been more and more talk among the public, but also among psychologists, about the concept of narcissists. You also have sociopaths and psychopaths. And you have even some that say that all 3 can be combined in one person. So I'm not here going to go into the definitions because it gets kind of theoretical, I think. But my point for this is that there is a rising awareness that some people really are different. Because, number 1, they don't have empathy. They don't seem, number 2, to value the life of other people, or the freedoms of other people, or the rights of other people. They have no compassion for them. They are basically willing to do whatever it takes to further some kind of agenda. And clearly you can see in these people that many of them, they have some agenda. I have a playlist called Ego Dramas. And I have a video in there that talks about the origin of epic dramas. And when you look at history, you see that many of these people who have committed these atrocities, they have done it because they were motivated by this epic drama that they had created in their minds. And a typical example is Hitler, who had this epic drama that the Aryan race was the superior race, the Jews were the inferior race that were a threat to the future of humanity, and therefore it was epically important that the Aryan race became the rulers of Earth, and that they wiped out the inferior race of the Jews and anybody else who was considered inferior, such as mentally handicapped and others. So what you see is that in Hitler's mind, he thought he was doing good. He thought that he was not good in the sense that he was being a nice guy. No, in the sense that he was doing something epically important for the future of humanity, even for the survival of humanity. It is this axiom that you do evil so that good may come, or that the ends justify the means. This is their basic modus operandi of these people, these beings. And if you think the goal is important enough, there's almost nothing you won't do in order to further that goal. And again, you can look at history and you can say, well, there's many examples that large parts of the general population, perhaps all people in a certain country, were pulled into supporting one of these dictators and their epic goals. Like many German people believed in Hitler and believed in what he told them. But still, could the ordinary, so to speak, person have come up with the epic agenda? No, they obviously couldn't. They could be pulled into supporting it or not objecting to it, but they couldn't have come up with it. So this is my main point for this video, because the whole series is about these lies that we have been brought up to believe. And what we're dealing with now is sort of a pivotal point where we can ask the question, well, where do these lies come from? And why are they put out there? Why are they formulated? And we can't understand this unless we realize that there are beings who appear in human bodies, who appear to be somewhat normal human beings, but they are not like normal human beings. They are a fundamentally different kind of being because they don't have the empathy and they have this epic agenda of proving something. And if you really look at it in universal terms, you can say the epic agendas may have different forms, like Hitler's agenda was one, the communist agenda of Mao was another, but basically it is to prove themselves right, to prove themselves superior, that they are right in some ultimate sense. This is the basic agenda. So what we see is that there are some beings who have this obsessive compulsive need to prove themselves right and who are willing to do anything to prove themselves right or to avoid being proven wrong, including killing any number of human beings. The cost in terms of human suffering in human lives doesn't matter to them whatsoever. In other words, human beings don't matter. And the reason why I say that the vast majority of people don't have that is very simple. Because I have said, of course, that we are not human beings, we're spiritual beings who inhabit human bodies. But nevertheless, we have in our bodies, we have programmed into them certain instincts that are created over a long period of time through the process that science calls evolution. We can debate whether it's an unconscious evolution or there's consciousness involved, but that's besides the point of this video. So, this is another lie which I'll talk about in another video. But anyway, what I'm saying is that our bodies, coded into our physical bodies, is a survival instinct. And as part of this survival instinct, you don't kill people of your own species. You see animals out there, virtually no animals kill members of their own species because it's a very bad survival strategy for the species. So human beings, we have this instinct. It's an instinctual thing. You don't kill other human beings. Now, besides that, normal human beings also have a certain respect for other people, a certain love for people they know. So just out of that love and respect, you don't hurt other people. This is beyond any kind of religion or ideology. I'm talking about something that it's basic. In my view, this is human nature. One of the basic elements of human nature is you don't kill other people. And you respect other people's right to be alive and to live their life the way they want to. And you have love for the people you know. This is, to me, this is human nature as we see it in terms of normal. But it's really not human as much as it's spiritual nature part of it. But some of it is purely physical in the sense that the survival instinct is programmed into the body. And so what I'm saying is that when a population, when a lot of people are pulled into supporting one of these epic agendas, like the concentration camps or the prison in Syria, they are manipulated into overriding the basic survival instinct of the physical body and the basic human nature respect for other people. They are manipulated into overriding this. And they are, of course, manipulated by a set of lies, including these epic agendas that I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is here, they are manipulated by a small elite of people who have, I won't say they don't have the survival instinct or the respect for others, but they have suppressed it to the point where it's not there in their conscious awareness. They have no respect for life. They have no sense that it's wrong to kill other people. Human beings are just tools for them. They are like chess pieces that can be moved around on the chessboard. They are expendable. Doesn't matter how many people are killed. What matters is the agenda fulfilled, the epic agenda. And so what I'm saying is that when you look at history, when you look at psychology, there is a growing awareness that there are these people who are narcissists, who are sociopaths and psychopaths. But it's like the signs are there. An understanding, a new understanding is beginning to break through. But what hasn't happened yet is that this growing awareness has crystallized into this realization. There are some beings in human bodies who are not what we normally call human beings because of the lack of empathy, lack of respect for life, and so forth. And why is it important to know about this lie? Well, there are many reasons, but I have talked about one reason already. How are you going to understand evil if you don't realize that what we normally call evil is committed by a small group of people who have a fundamentally different attitude to life than most human beings? How are you going to understand evil without realizing this? That's when you end up in these blind alleys. Either God created people the way so they could be evil, or God allows the devil to exist, or it's just human nature. And so for a spiritual person, and of course my videos are only directed at spiritual people, I think most spiritual people, it's important for us to understand evil because we can't just ignore it. I've been on a spiritual path for a long time. I met many people, thousands of people on the spiritual path for whom understanding evil was really important. And it's really not until you realize that there are some beings that are fundamentally different. Now here's where you have to be very careful when I say they are fundamentally different. Because you can say, well, where did these people come from then? Were they created that way by God, or were they created in the spiritual realm like that? Did God create two different kinds of people? And I have actually given a video where I explain this in more depth. It's called How the World Was Created. And if you really want to understand this, you need to watch the whole video because it's a long video and I'm not going to repeat it all here. But basically, the reality is that these beings were not created any different from the rest of us. They were created with an individual sense of self and with free will. But over a long period of time, they have developed differently than most people have. And that's why my previous video set the foundation for this video, where I talked about continuity. Because, as I said, we all have a very complicated psychology, and it was not something we were born with, it was not in our genes, and it was not the result of our childhood in this lifetime. It was something we created over many previous lifetimes. And it's the same with these beings that I'm talking about, these power elite people. They started out like all of us did. Sense of individual, an individual sense of self. We have imagination, we have free will, we interact with an environment we are in, and over time we build our sense of self. But as I also explained in the previous video, we all have two basic choices for how we basically use our free will. We can see ourselves as connected beings who are connected to our higher selves and the spiritual beings in a higher realm that are really our spiritual parents. Or we can go into what I call the illusion of separation, where we are separate beings. And so, again, some beings, I mean, if you look at Earth, most people on Earth have gone into separation by using the duality consciousness. But there are some beings who have gone deeper in it than the vast majority of people on Earth. And they have actually had a longer time to use this dualistic mind to create these epic agendas. And I explain how that takes place in the other video, how the world was created. I'm not going to go into it here because it's too much. It's really not necessary to understand the point here. So the point is that there are beings that have an agenda. And in an outer sense, you can say they have these epic goals. Like Hitler had the goal of making the Aryan race rule the earth and purifying the human race. The communists had the goal of making the whole world communist, basically under their own rule if they could. And you see many other examples of this. So the Christians had the goal of making everyone Christian, the Muslim had the same goal, and so forth and so on. So that's the outer sort of framework. But if you step back from this, what these beings are trying to do, as I said, is prove themselves right in some absolute way. And here's how this works. I have given quite a number of videos where I talk about what happens in the psychology when you go into separation. You lose your sense of connection to your own higher being, but you also lose your connection to what I call the one mind. And I've explained in several videos how when our Creator created us as individual beings and gave us free will, the Creator knew that we could potentially become lost in our own creation. We could create a sense of self that it was difficult to extricate ourselves from. So therefore, the Creator first created what I call the one mind. You can also call it the Christ mind or the Buddha nature. But it created the one mind, and everything is created out of that. So that means that you always have a way back. You can go into what I call separation, but you always have a way back. And when you are a connected being, the goal, the ultimate goal, which I also explained in the video about how the world was created, is that you raise your consciousness until you reach the same level of consciousness as the Creator. This is the potential we all have. But when you go into this consciousness of separation, you lose your sense of your connected being. You lose your conscious connection to the one mind. Therefore, you go into this separate mind. You're still in the one mind, and therefore, no matter how deeply you go into separation, you can come back. But you can't do it until you reach out to the one mind and want to change. So what happens is when you go into separation, you are creating a new sense of self as a separate being. Before that, you had a sense of self as being a connected being. Now you're creating a sense of self as a separate being. The sense of self as a connected being literally dies, and you are reborn, so to speak, into a sense of identity or a separate being. As a separate being, you always feel threatened. You always feel you're incomplete. You feel you've lost something. So your whole life becomes about compensating for this sense of loss. And the only way you can conceive of this in the separate state of mind is to elevate the separate self, the separate identity you have, to a higher and higher status. You want to be right. So this is why many people can be pulled into following these dictators. Because everybody who is in separation has this need to compensate for the loss. They have this need to feel that they are right. So here comes Hitler. He says, I am ultimately right. And if you follow me, you will be right too. And this tied into the people's need to feel right. They thought, okay, we follow him, then we are right. And then we can feel, we can suppress the sense of loss, the sense of incompleteness, and feel that we are the good people who are doing what's absolutely necessary. So this explains why ordinary people can be pulled into following a dictator. But of course, it doesn't mean that ordinary people, even though they are in separation, would do what the dictator is doing. Because the dictator belongs to this, what I call this special group of people who have gone so deeply into separation that they have developed or come to believe in these epic agendas. And most people couldn't develop this. They are just not so deep into separation. But what I'm trying to explain here is that when you step back from the outer agendas, you see that what these beings are trying to do is they are trying to build up the separate self to some ultimate status. So what I said was, when we see ourselves as connected beings, we can reach higher and higher levels of consciousness, higher and higher degrees of oneness with our source, with our creator. And through that oneness, we're also one with all life. We actually become as gods. We are, so to speak, gods in the making. But we achieve this through oneness, which means we have ultimate respect for other life streams, for their free will and their right to exist. We have ultimate respect for the law of free will. So we are literally becoming gods. But these beings who have gone deeply into separation, they are driven by this desire to elevate the separate self to an ultimate status, meaning they are trying to become gods through separation from the whole. And that is an impossibility. It cannot be done. It simply cannot be done. They are on an impossible quest. And that's why it's so important to come to understand the existence of these beings. Because as a spiritual person, the last thing you want to do is to be pulled into supporting the agenda of one of these narcissistic, sociopathic personalities. Or their ideas, the ideas they have put out there. You want to free yourself from the lies that they have been put out, because otherwise, how are you really going to have maximum spiritual growth and fulfill your potential? How are you going to help build the golden age that I talked about in the previous video? If you are pulled into supporting these agendas of these narcissists instead of supporting the goal of Saint Germain. I mean, it's just, following these people or believing in some of their ideas is going to abort your spiritual growth, or at least put it on pause. You can waste lifetimes going around supporting these agendas. And you can talk about it in terms of karma as well. I mean, most people, spiritual people, are open to karma And if let's say you were alive in the 1930s in Germany, and you supported Hitler, perhaps you became a soldier or a general, or perhaps you worked in a concentration camp. Just imagine the kind of karma you made. This is not the kind of karma you want to make as a spiritual person. So that's why it's important to come to the point where you can see through, start seeing through these lies that they have put out. You can start realizing, and what you need to realize is, there is this specific group of people. Some of them are not even in the physical body, as I explained in my other video, but there's a specific group of beings who have it as their ultimate goal to elevate themselves as separate beings to a godlike status. In order to achieve this, they are seeking to control all other people on the planet. And they control people partly through raw physical power if they have it, but their primary means of seeking to control people is through ideas, through these lies that are put out, the biggest lies that we have been brought up to believe in. That's their primary means of controlling us. And as a spiritual person, if you want to grow beyond a certain point on the spiritual path, if you want to raise your consciousness beyond a certain level, you have to start seeing through these lies. And there are two ways you do this. There is the outer way, where you use the outer mind, the rational, logical, analytical mind, to become aware that there are these beings who are deliberately seeking to control you, and they are controlling you by having put out these lies that you might have been brought up to believe in. But you also do it in the inner way by connecting to the one mind. And this is something I'll talk about in another video. But we all have access, as I said, to the one mind directly within ourselves. And you can use the outer mind to gain some understanding of these lies. I mean, that's essentially why I'm doing these videos. But you won't really be able to see them as lies until you connect to the one mind. And this gives you a frame of reference where you see, because when you experience the oneness of the one mind, you can sense intuitively this idea comes from separation. And therefore it doesn't come from the one mind, and therefore it isn't true, it isn't real, it isn't constructive. It isn't going to help you grow. You just sense this intuitively, you know it. It's an inner knowing. But often, before we can have that inner knowing, we need to have some outer awareness, some outer understanding of the lies, that the lies exist. I mean, just look at how most of us were brought up. We were brought up to believe in certain lies, including this. There are no people that are fundamentally different from us, right? And we were not brought up with any even idea that this could be a lie. We were not brought up with any idea that there are lies out there that we have been brought up to believe in, that there are beings who are seeking to control us by deliberately and aggressively putting out these lies. We were not brought up with that awareness. Why not? Because our societies are still somewhat controlled by these beings who are seeking to hide themselves. You see, this power elite that I'm talking about, they know they're different. They just don't want you to know. They're trying to hide themselves. They're trying to do everything they can to hide themselves. I mean, just look. I talked about in the Middle Ages, we had the feudal societies in Europe. Here there was a nobleman who owned the land. There could be thousands of peasants living on his land. They were doing all the work, so he could sit in his castle and eat, drink, and be merry. And he had no problems with this. They were his slaves, and he had no problems with this. He had no respect for them whatsoever. So now I was brought up, at least, I don't know about you, but I was brought up to see that, oh, this was a primitive time. And it's all over now, because now we have democracy. And we are free, and we can vote, and this and that. And I'm not saying that democracies isn't an improvement over the medieval societies. But what do you think happened to these feudal lords of the Middle Ages? Where are they today? Well, they have reincarnated. And some of them have reincarnated as the big business people and billionaires in our Western modern democracies. Some of them are also politicians, but many of them are these billionaires because you see, as I mentioned before, that in the United States, for example, the top 2% control 95% of the wealth in the country. There are people who have so much money they couldn't spend it on personal consumption for the rest of their lives. They literally don't know what to do with it. And yet, they have no compunctions about employing thousands of people and paying them as little as possible, or giving them no right to join a labor union, for example, or organize or demand better conditions. So if you look at some of these big business people, these billionaires, I'm not going to mention names here, they are acting as if they were the feudal lords, and their employees are just like the peasants who live on our land and who are literally their slaves. And they have the same, lack of respect, lack of empathy, lack of any sense of oneness. And so all I'm trying to say is that even though we have democracies that are more aware and more aware of the abuse of power, we still have the same people embodied here. They still have powerful positions, and we still haven't seen it. They still are managing to hide their existence, their methods, their modus operandi, their mindset. They're still managing to hide this from the general population. And I'm not expecting that the general population is going to wake up because I'm doing this video. But what I'm saying is, if you're watching this video, if this appeals to you at all, resonates with you, consider that you need to become more aware of these people's agenda, the lies they have put out there, because this will limit your spiritual growth if you don't transcend these lies. And we were all brought up to believe in many of these lies. That's my whole point here. I'm not trying to say that I was any different. I was brought up to believe in a lot of lies. But I have gone through a process over many years, decades even, where I have gradually freed myself from many of these lies, and you can do the same. Maybe you have already freed yourself from some of these lies. Then it's just a matter of becoming more aware of it. And I think, my main point for this video is really to say, we have all been brought up to believe in certain lies. Lies don't just appear out of nowhere. Lies are created by certain people who have a deliberate agenda for creating the lies. And part of that agenda is to control us, to limit us, to hold us down, but also to get us to support them. And another agenda is to hide themselves and how they exercise power. And so, once you realize this, it's like a lot of opportunities open up for you as a spiritual person. Because now you can see that, first of all, it is important for you to deliberately, consciously look at these lies and free yourself from them. And this can really speed up your progress if you get over a certain hump. Because I can see it in myself, I can see it in many people I've known, that we all have certain lies that we don't see as lies. We are attached to them. We really want to believe in them. We don't want to see them as lies. And this means that I've seen over the years many, many spiritual people. We are starting to awaken. We're starting to realize that we weren't told everything when we were growing up. But there are certain things we are reluctant to look at and say, oh yeah, that's a lie. So in other words, it's like a dichotomy, contradiction in our minds. On the one hand, we are waking up. On the other hand, there's a subconscious resistance to really seeing these lies. And if you can become aware of that resistance and consciously decide to overcome it, to transcend it, to say, no, I am willing to know better, then you can speed up your progress a lot. I've seen people who have been on the spiritual path for many years, decades even, and they have made progress, but they have certain lies they are not willing to let go of because they're not willing to look at them. And that means they're approaching the threshold where they really could go into a higher state of consciousness, but they can't make it over the hump. They go up there and touch it, and then they go down again. They resist, they hold back. They're not really taking the plunge. But if you can really take the plunge and say, I am willing to know what lies I believe in and that are holding me back, you can really speed up your growth. The other thing is that if you really want to overcome these lies, you need to realize that, as I said, it's a twofold process. You have to, with the outer mind, you have to examine the lies and come to see them as best you can. But you also need to connect with the one mind. However, connecting with the one mind is not something you just do on an impersonal level, because the one mind isn't some amorphous thing. Right? We are living on Earth. Earth is a pretty low planet. I said earlier that we can rise up through levels of consciousness till we reach the greater consciousness. But the greater consciousness is way, way up there compared to Earth. And you are not going to make the jump from the consciousness we have on Earth to the greater consciousness. So, but what you can do is you can realize that the spiritual path has many levels. And there's a level that's right above Earth. And in that level are self-aware beings like us. I call them ascended masters because they have ascended by mastering their minds, which is the potential we have as well. So they are the ones who represent the Christ mind, the one mind for us. They represent the Creator for us. And therefore, if you really want to be free of these lies, you need to connect to the ascended masters. Now, the ascended masters have also given many outer teachings that you can read and study that can help you see through these lies. The ascended masters have, it's an interesting, not to go in too much into the history of it, but there was a time where the ascended master couldn't step forward publicly because of the law of free will, that people have to be able to deny that there's anything beyond Earth. But within the last 100 years, they have been allowed to step forward and present themselves. We exist, we are in the spiritual realm, we are ascended masters, we can help you grow. And they have done this through several different organizations where they have, some people have been educated or trained to become messengers that can receive direct messages from them. And it's been my privilege to serve in that capacity since 2002. And there are, of course, other messengers who have also brought forth a lot. So I'm not saying I'm the only one, you only need to look at me, but because you need to find a teaching that resonates with you. But what I'm saying is, it can be enormously helpful for you on your spiritual path to study some of these outer teachings. Because what the Ascended Masters have done is to bring forth these outer teachings specifically designed to help you grow. And why have they done this? Because many of them have been embodied on Earth over many lifetimes. So they know the planet, they know the density of the energies on the planet, they know these lies, they have ascended by coming to see through the lies. And therefore, they are uniquely suited, they have the experience to help us who are still unascended. So you can say that there is a group of beings who are deliberately trying to delay or abort your spiritual growth. Then there's a group of beings in a higher realm that are deliberately trying to help you speed up your spiritual growth. So maximum spiritual growth is you reach out for the beings who are seeking to help you, and you allow them to help you see through the lies, so you free yourself from the downward pull of those who are seeking to hold you back. And that's how you really grow. And I can assure you from personal experience that it's a tremendous help. I first found Ascended Master Teachings in 1984. And I can't even imagine what my spiritual path would have been like if I hadn't found that, because it gave me so many insights, so many practical tools for invoking spiritual energy, that it's just sped up my growth tremendously. And I think there's I'm sure I would have grown from following other spiritual teachings, but I think I might have grown to here, and now I'm at a much higher level. So it can really be tremendously helpful. And basically what I'm saying here is that the only way to really free yourself from these beings that are pulling you down is to connect to the beings who are pulling you up. Because it's difficult to see through these lies entirely with the intellectual linear mind. You need to have that experience of the frame of reference of the one mind and those who are united with the one mind, because this allows you to not just intellectually understand the lies, but to experience that they are lies. You see, as I said, we were all brought up not even to question the lies. And this is, if you have a group of people who have grown up in a dark mine underground, they've never been told there's anything called the sun. Well, how would they even question? Is there a sun up there? You can't even come up with the idea if you are so entrenched in the lies. But the moment you take a person up to the surface, give them a glimpse of the sun, even if they go back into the mind for a time, now they have a frame of reference. They know that darkness isn't the only thing that exists. There is light. And because you have a frame of reference, there's something beyond the lies you were brought up to believe. You can now start questioning the lies. And you can start connecting with that one mind in yourself and in the Ascended Masters. And that's how you really overcome these lies.